Hey, folks, good evening and welcome to Phantoms and Monsters Radio. And thanks for joining me. I want to welcome all new members to the channel as well as first timers in the chat. So I'm going to start off with a brief account before we get going here. An Arkansas man had a bizarre encounter with an unknown man at a local gas station. And leading up to this encounter, the entire atmosphere had changed, causing the witness to be on guard. I received the following account. Last summer, I had something happen to me that has left me feeling uneasy since. I live in a small town in central Arkansas. Now, one evening after work, I had to stop at a local convenience store to get some gas for my car. A man and his son stood at the pump opposite me, and a young woman was standing by her car behind him. Now, when the gas nozzle clicked full, I placed it back into the pump and went inside the store to pay. And when I came out, everything seemed different. There was nobody by the pumps. I had paid for my gas and walked back out in just a minute or so. But there was nobody anywhere. It was so bizarre, like I had stepped into another world. I suddenly felt scared, but didn't understand why. Then a man walked out of the wooded lot to my right. He was standing by my car at the same time as I was heading towards it. When I walked by him, I noticed an awful stench coming from the man. He looked like a normal guy, not wearing dirty or old clothes. He looked like he was in his 30s or so. But when I again looked at him, I felt scared, like something bad was going to happen. I opened my car door and looked back at him. He was staring at me. The man came closer, kind of shuffling his feet. "I need a ride," the man told me. The way he said it was startling, like a physical force hit me right between the eyes. He then said, "Give me a ride." And that's when I noticed that his eyes had changed to solid black. No whites, no nothing. It was like I was looking into the abyss. The stench was also starting to affect me. "Where do you want to go?" The man replied, "Just give me a ride and don't ask questions." I said, "No, I can't. I've got to go home." He took a few steps toward me. I immediately got into the car and closed the door. As I started the car, the man put his face up to my car door window. I felt compelled to look at him. I started to feel sick to my stomach. I put the car in gear and got the heck out of there. Now, this has been troubling me. I've been having terrible dreams about this man almost every night since it happened. I'm also afraid to go to sleep some nights. This is a small town. Everyone knows everyone else. But nobody has seen this black-eyed man. I just don't understand what happened that night. So the witness and I exchanged emails. He was sincerely frightened and wrote to me, "I feel like the man is going to reach through my dreams and kill me." He has sought psychological care, but states the treatment did not help alleviate his dreams. So that's just a little taste of what I got for you. So let's get started and experience this terror together.
We live in a reality of phantoms and monsters. They exist among us, and sometimes they win. Even the devil was an angel once. The world has its own rules, and these rules are not human. Some of us seek answers to the origin and existence of cryptids and the unexplained. Join us as we venture beyond the known and accepted boundaries. Welcome to our nightmare. I think you're going to like it.
So before I go any further, I just want to mention that this channel is made possible by you clicking on subscribe and like buttons and by you sharing our programming. Super chat and super thanks donations are appreciated. And you can click the dollar icon located below the chat box. The Buy Me a Coffee link is also shown below. Thanks for your consideration. Now, your comments are always welcome. Tell me what you found interesting in this presentation or suggestions for upcoming shows. I want to thank our chat moderators, Bernadette, Marla, Thomas, and Mike, for their commitment to me and the channel. Now, if you're in the chat and you have questions, please use all caps, and I'll try to get to each one of them after my presentation. So, a Maryland mother vividly describes her harrowing encounter with a cryptid canine in Rock State Park in Harford County, Maryland, while visiting with her young sons. She states, on Monday, October 18th, 2021, at midday, I took my 7- and 2.5-year-old sons to Rock State Park, which is 1.5 miles up the road from my house. We were in the Hidden Valley area. The park is small, 4 parking space and a half-mile trail that follows a creek. The trail ends at a fork in the creek with the beachhead about 20 feet long. 6 people would be a crowd. Now, both of my sons are familiar with this park as it's in a rotation of 3 parks we choose from to go on a little hike once a week. The trail is moderate with some inclines, natural obstacles, and occasional narrowing due to the lack of maintenance. Now, my oldest son is comfortable being 30 to 50 feet ahead of me while I pace my youngest. Nothing out of the ordinary, just a normal hike. Now, my eldest reaches the beachhead 15 to 20 seconds before us. We approach the creek beach, and my youngest is on my left, starting to mess with rocks and throwing them in the creek. My oldest is 10 to 15 feet to my right, messing around, throwing rocks in the water. I bend down to cuff my pant leg and hear a blood-curdling scream from my oldest. I look up at him and he is screaming, falling backwards, feverishly kicking his legs. I follow his line of sight across the creek. Perched on a large flat rock is an animal I just could not understand. It was no more than 20 to 25 feet away, and its dimensions seemed so large it looked as if it could leap the creek in one stride. A barrel chest with clearly defined pectoral muscles, shoulders, and biceps, no different than a man, but just a lot larger. Bulging eyes and a stubby snout like a hyena. It looked as if it was in a sprinter starting position, not an animal on all fours. Its thighs and hind end were noticeably large. The mass of this animal was unnatural. The ears faced forward with hair tufts on the side and tops of the head. The face looked as if it was on high alert, like when your dog has quick head movements because you're getting ready to throw a ball. It kept twitching between my son screaming, falling backward into the trail, running away, and me screaming and picking up my other son. As I'm frantically trying to get between it and my first son, it's almost like looks as if it was in a lunging position, that or backing up. My perspective was head on before turning into the trail. I get to him and we are out of direct sight. I yell at son 1 to run. The weirdest thing would happen. The 7-year-old would start sprinting and crying, and after 30 feet, he would turn around almost in a complete daze, not understanding what was happening. Then I would have to yell at him again to run. He would run, cry, stop, dazed. This happened 3 times. I still don't understand how shock or fear could do that. The animal did not follow us down the trail. Now, the thoughts going through my head, I wouldn't wish on my enemies. It was the only thing in my life, it was the only time in my life when I knew I could not protect my children. The buck knife on my hip was no better than a pillow. The moment I told my 7-year-old he might have to take his younger brother's hands to get back to the car as fast as he could. This has left a scar deeper in my mind than this unexplainable animal. Even though there's no mistaking what I witnessed, it doesn't matter. Trying to explain this to anyone is pointless. I like to think that I'm considerably self-aware. I cannot understand why my mind has forced me to debunk what I saw. I was undoubtedly afraid, but my focus was crystal clear. Kids safe at all costs. I was laser focused on my surroundings and what was in it. None of my emotions distorted my vision or made me misinterpret my surroundings. Now, Rock State Park is just south of me in Maryland, and it's an area that Tim Renner, Chad Redding, and I are investigating at the moment. I know there have been Bigfoot sightings there in the past, but this suggests a cryptid canine of some type. So we're going to see what happens. If I get anything from that location, I will definitely do a report on it. So stay tuned for that. Now, in this next account, a group of friends and family were traveling up Brown Mountain, North Carolina, to observe the lights. And after a bumpy ride, an unexplained series of events occurred on the way down the mountain. The witness states this happened in 1972 when I was 14 years old. My father decided to drive up a logging road that led up to the Brown Mountain in North Carolina. We had a 1969 Ford van with 4 rows of seats. And in this van were my father at the wheel, my mother, us 5 kids aged between 8 and 15, and I think my father's friend and his wife. Long van, but lots of seats, all full. Now, I think my father must have wanted to see the lights at night, which was the infamous Brown Mountain lights, because, you know, they appear at night. This is maybe not directly related, but then again, maybe it was. Now, my father had met an old fellow named Ralph. I was there. It was at some local store that carried Mr. Ralph's pamphlets about getting to the top of Brown Mountain and being taken into a crystal chamber by the UFO people there. I think they promised to take Mr. Ralph and his wife with them when things got very strange. So we all bounced up the dirt road after sundown on a mountain probably 60 miles from home. The road just kept switching back and getting narrow as the night went completely dark. All I could see was the headlights lit, and that was the only 20 yards at most. I vaguely recall that I may have been worried during the drive up that the saucer people might not like us as much as they liked Mr. Ralph. Now, what I honestly believe was well over an hour, and maybe closer to 2, the road was so narrow, steep, and rutted that my father was struggling to keep the van going further. And there seemed to be no place wide enough to turn around. In those days, my father had a cheater knob, aka suicide knob, on the van's steering wheel. These are legal, but do yourself a favor and don't get one unless you need it. Now, this knob is important to the story because we ran into a ditch running across the road. Good thing we were only going 10 miles an hour. It was still spine rattling, and my father's hand cracked the windshield while holding the broken off knob. I don't think his hand was broken, but it was out of the game. My father's friend took over, somehow got the loaded van out of the ditch somewhere up Brown Mountain, found a way to get us turned 180 and drove down off the mountain. Funny thing, we were back on the main road within 10 minutes. I never understood how we got down off the mountain and back onto the main road that quickly, especially after it had taken us over an hour to drive up the mountain. Another strange thing also occurred. We saw hundreds of bright orbs on the drive down the mountain. None of us never understood what happened that night. And I will attest to the Brown Mountains. I had been there to Brown Mountain. And Butch told me a story. He did an investigation down there years and years ago where he had lost about an hour's worth of time as well. So I've heard a lot of stories about that place. Now, this next is next one is a personal event that the experiencer rarely speaks of, but which has dramatically changed the course of their life. It's hard to put into words, and the emotions are still intense. Mr. Strickler. I was 22 and in college. I'm 36 now. I still haven't fully recovered. November 23rd, 2009 is the day it happened. I lived in rural South Central Pennsylvania, though I'm reluctant to be too specific. I know you live near where it took place, but I don't want the public to know. One side of the street had a small strip of houses with farmland behind. Houses further apart than a typical street. Across the street was farmland, then wilderness all the way to the mountains. Pretty isolated, unfamiliar neighbors. The backyard wasn't fully enclosed. The house had been expanded in years past, so what used to be the back patio had been turned into a greenhouse room made entirely of windows. I lived alone. I had gotten home from a night out with friends in the nearest city, about 30 minutes away by the freeway. It was sometime after 2 a.m. I hadn't had anything to drink that night because I had been going kind of hard lately in college, and I wanted to take it easy. I went inside, fed my cats. Nothing was out of the ordinary. I went into my bedroom and flopped down on the bed, which was nothing more than a mattress on the ground pushed up against the corner of the bedroom. Now, at that time, I used to keep my bedroom door open. I'm lying on my back as I drift off to sleep. I wake. I immediately notice two things. The first is an ambient light, the way dawn looks through a window, but it's still dark in the room. Second, there's something very near me. I was on my back in the bed. This thing was situated near my waist at the side of the bed. I couldn't tell if it was standing and was only 3 foot tall or was sitting. I only remember the face. It was gray colored, large black eyes, but not as large as they may make them look in the movies and media. Egg-shaped, some sort of scales of pigmentation which looked like very aggressively furrowed eyebrows. I felt from it an intense, hateful, malevolent sensation. It wanted to hurt me. I don't know how I knew that from the feeling it emanated, but I knew. I didn't have an emotional response at first. I was very shocked. Then I managed to utter a slight whoa as I put my hands up defensively and moved my body away from it, slamming into the wall as it did so. I didn't have time to feel any panic or terror before a type of hand came up and hit me on the head. My vision was awash in a world of gray milkiness with dark gray veins interspersed. I could move so it wasn't sleep paralysis. Felt too real to be hypnagogic hallucination, especially since it wasn't anything near what I was dreaming about upon waking. I don't have sleep apnea, so I wasn't experiencing loss of oxygen to my brain. Though I've entertained these as possible explanations, none suffice because the experience doesn't fully meet all the criteria of any phenomena. The next thing I remember is trying to wake up, but being extremely disoriented. Like when you've been under anesthesia and you're trying very hard to wake up, but you can't snap out of it. I'm panicking while trying to wake up. I finally snapped out of it. I immediately vomit and begin sobbing uncontrollably, but I'm too scared to close my eyes. There's blood from me rubbing them to keep them open by the time I'm able to stop crying. It takes me an hour to build up the courage to get out of bed. I grab a bat and begin clearing each room, trying to avoid panicking. There's no one there. No signs of forced entry. My cats were terrified of me until I sat down and put on a hat. I'm bald and I have dark circles under my eyes, so they saw this thing too. The similarity must have made them scared of me. The aftermath was, and then the hardest part, for 5 days I couldn't return home. I stayed with other people and my ex-girlfriend would feed the cats. I finally returned home, sitting in my car in the driveway for a couple hours. My cat's peeking through the curtain to meow at me. I kept a knife taped to my back, one in my pocket, a bat by my side, and the phone with the flashlight app always nearby. I rearranged all my furniture to see all the doors and windows. I would panic if I tried to sleep at night. I developed a caffeine addiction. For the rest of my time in college, including my graduate program, I lived on a night schedule. I did not sleep until the sun came out. Never left the lights off. And did not go outside my house after dark for 5 years. No exceptions. I would stay out after dark with friends or at school, but wouldn't return home until sunup. I have been unable to close my eyes voluntarily for anything longer than a blink without fear setting in. I slowly was able to push myself out of necessity for work back to sleep at night and maintaining a healthy lifestyle. But I'm frequently late to work and most often exhausted throughout the day. Now, to this day, I still have an incredible amount of fear about falling asleep at night. I still arrange furniture tactically. I keep a weapon near me at all times. I was never able to return to the state of physical health and confidence I had before this event. I sought help and was referred to psychologists despite me being one. I sought out people who claimed to have had similar experiences. They mostly were mentally unsound or selling something. You don't have to believe me. This story, though, is out there. This next account, a London bookseller recalls his harrowing experience with a black-eyed man in his store. The encounter startled the bookseller so badly that he felt he needed to sell his business. Hi, Lon. I've been reading your blog recently. I was drawn to the recollections of people who had experiences with black-eyed people. So I decided to contact you with my story. Now, I used to own an occult bookstore in Westminster, London, UK, about 15 years ago. The checkout counter faced opposite the store entrance. It was around noon, and there were a few customers checking out. My employee and I were helping customers when I noticed a man in a light sweater walk into the store. He looked normal, but was looking down in front of him. Now, after he entered, he walked a few steps toward the bookshelves. He lifted his head a bit, and I caught a glimpse of the side of his face. He then turned his head and looked directly at me, like he knew I was watching him. His eyes were as black as night. I was shocked and just stared at him. I felt as if I was hit with a bolt of electricity and my knees weakened. My employee noticed my condition and literally grabbed me before I fell to the floor. I told her I was okay, that my blood sugar may have dropped and I needed to get something to munch on. I turned my back and walked to the small table behind the counter. But then I heard my employee say, "Excuse me, sir." I quickly turned and noticed the black-eyed man standing behind the counter and only a few feet from me. He stared directly at me, not saying a word. I was so frightened and suddenly ran towards the stair and up to my office, hoping he'd not follow. I heard my employee tell him that she would call the police if he didn't leave. I remained in my office for several minutes. My employee walked halfway up the stairs to check on me and asked I asked if he had left. She said he was gone. I told her to close the store. It was a terrible experience, and I literally feared for my life. I haven't seen any other black-eyed people since then, but I was so affected by this encounter, I decided to sell the business soon afterwards. I just can't explain why I did so, but I feel it was important to not be there any longer. Now, a Colorado rancher is shocked after witnessing a cattle abduction and mutilation one night. It disturbed him so much that he decided to sell his ranch and move to This was sent to me, I think it was sent to me by a friend of his. I knew a former Colorado rancher who owned a ranch near Del Norte and one near Mesa, Arizona. The sight of strange, harsh glaring lights on the mountains to the southeast near Alamosa, Colorado was a common sight. Odd aircraft with extremely strong searchlights would meander through the peaks. Strange and odd animal mutilations would occur there. These sights bothered him and his wife a lot. So one night spelled the end of his continued life in this weird area. His wife had died a few years prior. He now lived alone. He told me that he had gone to bed early because he had to get up early to take care of the livestock and chores. His bedroom window looked out onto an adjoining east corral, which was fenced in, with the house nearly a couple of feet to the fence line. There were several cattle he looked after, which had been divided from the herd for several reasons. And at around 1 a.m., he was awakened by a bright, intense white light blasting through the window momentarily. He got up to see what was going on, and as he peered over the windowsill, he couldn't believe his eyes. A large saucer-shaped object, almost 50 feet in diameter, was hovering above one of his cows, not but 100 feet away from the house. The cow was surrounded by light. The vehicle utilized the light to power up a beam to lift the animal into the base of the craft hovering above. This sight put the fear of God into the rancher. He told me that he rushed away from the window, snuggled down between the floor and the wall, didn't sleep the remainder of the entire night, utterly petrified. No sounds were heard except for the animal's cries and then silence. At dawn, the rancher dressed, rushed out to the corral area and found less than 30 foot away from the bedroom window the mutilated carcass of the same cow he had seen levitated by the craft. Calling the sheriff, he contacted authorities who listened to his story and basically told him they couldn't do anything about these incidents. The authorities were helpless. I talked to him about this, and he told me that Robert Stack's television program, Unsolved Mysteries, had contacted him about the event, arranged an interview, and he talked to them on camera. Now, the rancher said he would do it on the condition that his face not be shown, nor any identifying information be divulged. Now, the harrowing incident put some fear into him that he decided all the weird events he had witnessed over the many years he had owned the ranch, and he had been raised there as a youngster as well, would keep him there no longer. He had decided to sell the property and move to the other land in Arizona. I know this individual personally, as I was also a horseman and accompanied him to Arizona mountains on pack trips. He was a very dependable conservative veteran with many contracts to do work for electric utilities, as well as a solid work and community trustworthiness. Knowing his sincere story and knowing his background leaves no doubt in my mind. The story is true, and I believe quite reliable because it came from him. This bizarre narrative is not something he would make up. He received no money for this. Publicity was not welcome because of his work with Arizona utilities. And he could not believe what he had seen. But he had to accept the fact that it did occur. This was so frightening, he said to me. I simply couldn't stay there any longer. It's a true story, and I vouch for him. Now, a woman recalls an alien encounter account told to her by her father that obviously affected him for life. It's a cryptic tale of horror some experiencers suffer during these incidents. Between the two of my parents, I have always been closer with my father. He's warmer, more in tune with his emotions, and has always shared similar interests and beliefs with me. Not to say that I don't appreciate and love my mother for her stoic pride and strength despite her coldness. Anyway, one day a few years ago, I was driving with my dad in his truck, swapping stories with him. Since he's my dad and he was there for most of my stories, it was mainly him telling me about stuff from his younger years. I'm a huge cryptid fan, Bigfoot, Mothman, chupacabras, you name it. So naturally, I asked him if he had ever seen anything strange or had ever experienced the paranormal. It started out lightheartedly, talking about weird shadows he had seen and the fact that he believes in ghosts and aliens. My mom doesn't. Once he mentioned aliens, I told him about the 2 encounters I had had. After I told him, he seemed off. He was quiet for a minute and then said, "Don't tell your mom I talked to you about this. She thinks I'm lying and will get upset if she knew I told you." So, of course, I tuned in big time. He told me he looked dead. He told me he looked dead in the eye into the eyes of something not from this earth plane or existence. One night, many years ago, he and his buddies were out driving in his old pickup. They were from the deep south, so they were just driving through endless woods and fields near his uncle's house. They were chatting and driving until they saw it. He said it all happened in a matter of minutes, but felt like it was hours, like time felt drawn out and non-existent. He slammed on the brakes. A giant saucer-like machine was silently hovering just above him and directly in front of them on the road, entirely still and motionless. He said that one of the scariest parts, that a machine that was huge and that intricate, covered in impossibly bright and vibrant lights made of material nearly incomprehensible in texture and shape, could make no noise at all. Around the entire craft in a band-like shape, he could tell was some kind of one-way mirror window. He couldn't see into it, but he could feel in his bones and in his core that something was staring at him right in his eyes. He was paralyzed from it. He felt entirely known. He didn't know how, but he knew in his gut that whatever was looking at him knew his entire past and everything about him. It knew his name, and it had known him for a long time. He said it was like he was in an unwanted staring contest with God for what felt like hours. And then it flashed away over the tree line in a blink of the eye, impossibly fast. He checked the clock. Only a couple of minutes went by. He and his friends were horrified. They collected themselves and at full speed drove to his uncle's house to ask his aunt and uncle if they had seen it. They did. And they were pale in the face and acting very off. And moments later, it appeared in the tree line by their house. It remained there still for a couple of minutes, daunting and threatening, like a warning to mind their business and that they will be watched. And then it was gone. Never seen again, and he and his friends and family agreed not to speak of it again to each other to help themselves sleep. The worst was yet to come for him, though, in a separate story that had nothing to do with the UFO. He told me this one afterwards. He stopped himself and I had to coax him into telling me. I promised I wouldn't call him crazy. He had never even told my mother this story. The second story chills me to the bone and makes me afraid that my family is being followed by something we don't understand. I know it's true, too, because my dad is extremely jovial and lighthearted, and when he told me the story, he looked like a scared little boy. He teared up and looked visibly shaken. Mind you, I've never seen my dad scared or ever even cry before. But my dad made me promise I won't tell anyone this second story. I must keep it until my grave. He's afraid that if I speak of it, it will make cryptid things start happening around him and I again. I'm sorry for being such a tease with it, but I can't speak of it. I haven't even told my boyfriend for 2 years. Not a soul until I die. I only mention it so you know what my dad told me was true about what he saw out in the field by my uncle's house. I can't help but wonder if my family is specifically being followed, watched by someone or something. It would make my personal experiences with the paranormal and the unexplained make more sense, but I will never know for sure. So I did get a couple updates. She states, my father had an encounter with an otherworldly being that was in a UFO-like machine and for the rest of his life experienced odd things, one of which has only ever told me and promised me not to tell anyone until I die because it was that intense and cosmically horrifying. So the writer refuses to describe her father's second experience in more detail, and I can only hope that she'll eventually come forward with the details. I still have her contact information, so maybe it'll happen. Many multiple experiencers will hold back and avoid disclosing encounters that they feel others will not believe or just take seriously. So hopefully I will get some information on that one day. So I received this account as well. This event took place in late 2017 near Winter Park, Colorado, at a family friend's cabin. Now, the cabin is a remote place with a few houses around. I've been there twice before, but wasn't with my family during this trip as I live in California now. My family had spent the day sledding and came back to the cabin in the early evening. My parents and their friends were playing board games downstairs while my three siblings and their two friends were upstairs playing. So at some point, my mom notices that my youngest sister isn't playing with the rest of the kids and asks my other sister where she is. She said that she had gone into her room to listen to music, so my mother thought nothing of it. An hour or so went by, and my mom still hadn't heard or seen my sister, which was unusual, as she generally wouldn't pass up time to play with her friends. She again asked my other sister where she is, and she says that she's still in her room listening to music. So my mom checks the room to find that she wasn't there. Immediately, my mom goes into a panic and starts screaming her name. No response. Everyone in the house starts searching all the rooms in the house, but they can't find her anywhere. My mom then singles out my other sister and asks her why she had lied about my sister's whereabouts. She claimed she was being honest and that she had been listening to music. It's been about 2 hours since anyone has seen my sister. My mom goes outside to see if she can find her. Now, upon going outside, my mom tells me about the most horrifying thing that she's ever seen. My sister is inside our car with her face plastered to the window, wide-eyed, screaming. My mom said it was like a horror movie. Everyone had assumed she had somehow locked herself in the car. I'm not sure how a very intelligent 10-year-old girl locked herself inside a car. She'd been in thousands of times, but I digress. Upon opening the door to the car and getting my sister out, my mom notices that she's not behaving normally and appears to be in some kind of trance. They walk her inside and begin asking her questions about what had happened, but she doesn't respond to anything. She remains in this trance state for maybe an hour or two, so my mother gives up and puts her to bed. Now, in the morning, my sister appears to be acting somewhat normal, but seemed to be shaken up. My mother then asks her how she ended up in the car, but she says she doesn't remember how she got there. She says she only remembered one thing. As she was locked in the car, she saw a man dressed in all black approach her. She said she was terrified and tried to get out of the car. Then the man in black came closer and tells her that he would let her out, but she must do something for him. He holds a black rose up to the window and tells her that he wants her to come out so he can give it to her. Now, after hearing this story, excuse me, my mom goes outside to check the area around the car. To her amazement, she sees a trail of footsteps going from the car out past the house into the surrounding forest. No one had been playing or walking around the area before then, according to my mom, so she seemed very confused, disturbed about the tracks. We still don't know what to think about this. My mother said that she looked at my sister's face in the car and was sincerely terrifying. I'm not sure what happened that night, but the similarities of seeing a black figure and being in a trance-like state made me see a connection. If I'm not wrong, I believe Colorado is also a hotspot for missing 411 cases. I'm thankful my sister didn't become one of them, but maybe she saw something similar to what others have been seeing before their disappearance. So that's the last account, folks. You got any questions, put them up there, and let's see if we can answer them for you. I want to thank Lala Bright for her 2 donations. Very much appreciated. Let's see, Christine Lonner. Why do people see different weird things? Is it just our imagination manifesting or what? You know, that's a good question. After doing this for all these years, I've come to the conclusion that every person perceives everything different than anybody else. Now, I have done investigations where there be several witnesses, and overall they see the same thing, but there's always a bit of change perception-wise by each individual. Why that is, I don't know. But for whatever reason, some people do see things differently. Now, the fact that some people do see certain things, maybe they have an ability to be able to distinguish certain things. For instance, and I've talked about this many times, it's like the winged humanoid sightings in Chicago. Many times these things appear in crowds of people or where other people are around, and only 1 or 2 people actually see it, as if this thing appears for only those it wishes to see it. I think there's something to that, and I think it also is a trait in other phenomena. So I don't know. But that's the best I can tell you. Let's see. Thanks, Mortal Clown, for the $10 donations. Very much appreciated. So, Dag Nabbit asks, can black-eyed individuals be malevolent aliens? Oh, I guess they could be. We really don't know what the hell they are. I think they're possessed to some degree, but what are they possessed by? Is it spiritual possession? Is it some type of malevolent entity? Is it extraterrestrial? I don't know. But, as far as the black-eyed individuals go, that's anybody's guess as to what they are. I have read some cases that seem to be somewhat malevolent, but we just don't really know, and I don't know if we ever will know. Mortal Clown, thank you for another donation. Much appreciated. Can Squatch, Maryland seems to have many sightings for such a small state. Do you think some of these are government hybrids from nearby facilities? Yeah, I have talked about that, especially in that area where I was talking about with Rock State Park and there's Gunpowder State Park and other parks around that area. That's in Baltimore County. Then across the river into Hartford County, there's not Hartford County, Cecil County, but Hartford County and Baltimore County are on the west side of the river. But there are government facilities there. And I've talked about that before with individuals who have come forward to me who think the same thing. I don't know if there's so much being seen there and just not reported, or are we, people are much aware of it. Quite honestly, Maryland doesn't have that much more sightings than Pennsylvania, but it's kind of this whole region, this South Central Pennsylvania, Northern Maryland region. where there's just a lot of cryptid activity. In the past year and a half, 2 years, I've had 5 cryptid canine reports in Maryland, Pennsylvania, within like a 80 to 100 mile radius. So it's there's a lot going on here. Of course, my Bigfoot encounter in 81 down in Sykesville, near Sykesville, Maryland, which was that was on the Howard County side. It was Carroll County and Howard County, and Baltimore County is nearby there too. Hoskins Bob, always a pleasure to see you, Lon. Thanks for being you, sir. Well, thank you for being here. I appreciate it very much. Dagnammit, do you have any stories on bog monsters? Not really. Can't think of any. I'm sorry. Jose Sanchez, it's interesting that both the black-eyed kids and Bigfoot have similar black eyes. It's very strange. Yeah, many times Bigfoot sightings, they do mention black eyes, but I have seen, I have heard of others having different eyes, colors as well. The one I encountered had dark eyes, but I couldn't really see close enough to look at its eyes. And quite frankly, I wasn't really looking in the eyes. Christine Lehner, do people after seeing strange people or things have oncoming trouble afterwards? Many do. And a lot of the reasons why they don't come forward until a lot of that dissipates. Then many times they won't come forward because they're fearful it'll happen and start up again. So it's not unusual. Many times I'll have an encounter reported to me that happened very, very recently to the witness, and they're still shook up. But even afterwards, when I keep in contact with them, it still affects them. My encounters, it's something I'm never going to forget, and I will admit I dream about it on occasions. In my instance, it never really changes. It's always the same thing that I have encountered. So there's never been really any deviation from that. Mr. Rodham, how do you recommend experiencers deal with PTSD or shock, both short or long term? Well, I tell you what I did, because I had PTSD. I had what do they call that? I'm looking at it real quick. Yeah, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR. I had an encounter at work back in the 90s where I was literally attacked. I was put in the hospital. And after that, I experienced PTSD. And for up until maybe a year and a half ago, before I had my bariatric surgery, I had the desensitization therapy done for me with a remarkable therapist locally, and she put me through the protocol. And man, I don't have any issues anymore. I used to have problems driving. I mean, I would get out into the road and I couldn't drive on an open highway or over a bridge or anything like that. It really bothered me. And when people ask me about shock or PTSD and how to manage it, I do recommend them having EMDR sessions with someone who's competent, who's good at it. I will tell you, if you do want to write me and ask me about the woman I had, she's local, but she can do it online. You can stream. And I had 5 sessions, and it really helped. I highly recommend it. Shorter Cook, thank you for the donation. Anything else, folks? Any other questions? I want you all to do me a favor for those that are members who have become or want to become an insider or member. I will be doing the member only insider chat. So try to be there. I'll give you plenty of heads up, but you can ask me anything. And we had a session on Wednesday night. Went for about an hour. Didn't have a whole lot of people there, but it was very, very good. So if you want to become a member, just go to the to my YouTube channel and sign. Only $2.99 a month, and I will try to answer your questions as best I can. So I want to thank each and all of you for watching and chatting. And if you donate, it's truly appreciated. Your support is always what makes this possible. So please like, subscribe, and share. If you have a sighting report or encounter report and would like to be considered for the report, personal report show or post on Phantoms Monsters, feel free to contact me at Lon Strickler at phantomsandmonsters.com. So until we meet again, I want to thank you for being here, and we'll see you next Friday. So have a safe, enjoyable weekend. Good night.